besides housing policy an area that you wanted to work on?
Hello? Okay, we're okay here? Well, thanks for having me. Previous to being in the legislature, my first session was 2017. I spent about 24 years on the Whitefish School Board. And they finally got rid of me when there was a chance for the legislature. I was very interested in what really drives me a lot is governance and how things work. And what I like to say is the intellectual capacity of our body. And, for me, it doesn't matter conservative or liberal or somewhere in between. We need some smart people, like my colleague right here. So, we need to get things done, we have to have some thinkers. And I saw that an effective school board could work that way too. And then also understanding our roles and responsibilities, not to micromanage and evaluations and strategic planning and that sort of thing. So I was kind of curious about how the sausage is made legislatively. I'm not really strong-willed one way, left or right. I'm sort of a moderate, and I'm more interested in collaboration. So anyways, I said, hey, I've been on 24 years. Maybe I should be on the education committee. Right, you think? Well, welcome to the House. No, I wasn't. So I was not put on tax, and that was really interesting. And local government. And with local government, of course, it's an intersection of housing issues and living in a tourist-related area with a lot of visitation. We have housing issues, we have workforce housing issues. And so I thought to represent my area appropriately, I really need to dig into looking at some potential solutions for how to expand our market, that sort of thing. So I kind of went with it since 2017, and it continues to be a super interesting topic, very complicated, and very necessary for our state to succeed. Your turn.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I was a military careerist, and so for me, the reason I ran is twofold. I guess I believe that serving is essential to a life well lived, and also, I guess, like a lot of military guys, I like to be where the action is. I like to be in the arena by nature, so that's why I got into legislature right when I retired in 22. Freed up a lot of time for me, and I thought it would be pretty neat and a new arena to be in. So, as far as the housing side, I throughout my military career, started growing a landlord enterprise, and by my retirement, I had accumulated a few mobile home parks. I had gotten interested in that space. I ended up selling one of those parks to the residents through NeighborWorks, through the program called the Resident Community Program, which is a really neat program. And then got involved with them, kind of marketing that program for them, and then ended up on the board. And as a longtime landlord, have some housing background and investor. And then as I'm running my race, if you guys remember, the issue hasn't stopped, but it felt especially in that 22 cycle. I mean, as we were just really hitting the peak of the housing crunch, I guess there was still COVID. I mean, we were really hitting the peak of that, but you were hearing out the doors all the time, whether it was older folks or younger folks trying to start a family. So it was kind of that's housing was a huge issue that first session. So that's where my angle into housing comes. Like Dave, we started when Dave was in the House and the tax committee. I'm really interested in tax policy, and there are a lot of course, connections between tax policy and all policy really in housing. But got to work with Dave, and like you might have done education for 24 years, but you became quite a master of tax policy as well as housing policy. So really a pleasure to serve with Dave. He's a fantastic and rare legislator. There are not very many who do what he does, who get down in the weeds and understand policy like he does, and does it successfully, and then does it in the minority party, which is even harder. And probably the most well-liked Democrat, I'd say. So you thread this a needle that, I'm not even liked in my own party, and this guy's liked by everybody. So I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. But yeah.
Housing policy has always been accomplished through bipartisan solutions, so we're really lucky to have two champions from different parties here with us today. So looking back at the 2025 legislative session, there's a real focus on regulatory issues. You can see it in the slide, of over a dozen bills, I think, focused on that. Why do you think these issues have become so popular at the legislature?
Number one reason is they don't cost money. So if you ever try to spend $1 in the legislature, it's very hard, especially when you have three-way Republican control, even with surpluses. So, looking to regulatory solutions to solve housing is path of least resistance, honestly. So there's a lot of appetite from that in different, so from the governor's perspective, he's willing to do that, probably not willing to get the government deeply involved in housing policy, but he can get along with deregulation, right? So something we could all agree on, something we pushed pretty hard, and that some outfit labeled a Montana Miracle national outfit, and then they started calling it that, and we really kind of went, above and we did it all pretty much, like we took the best practices from around the country and then some. And then got it through mostly in one session, although actually starting in 23, and then with much more last session. But that's why I think there was an appetite that was bipartisan for that, and there was meat on the bone to take care of those things.
So there's something called MLUPA, which is the Montana Land Planning Act. Pretty controversial. And there was a committee put together that I was on during the summer before the session, and it had a lot of people, I guess, in the industry, planners, people involved with local governments, and concurrently there was a kind of a movement called the Abundance Movement. There's a book about that, and the thought was nationally, if you go in neighborhoods in Manhattan, Austin, Texas, San Francisco, wherever, what was happening is that there was becoming more and more of a housing shortage, and zoning for individual residential properties was getting to be a very special status in the United States, so much that you couldn't put a duplex in or something. And so it was, and still is, exasperating the situation of the housing inventory, and then the subset of that inventory, of course, is affordability and maybe deed restriction. So based on that, the Montana Land Planning Act was put together. The governor put together a housing task force that met over two summers, interim. They put together really a playbook of ideas. And I think with MLUPA, that's where you really had a lot of regulatory action that took place to hopefully usher in the effectiveness of MLUPA, of looking at planning a little bit differently, and looking also at one of the problems we have, and we still do, is while you want public participation, you try to find a blend of sort of the NIMBY movement of not in my backyard, but having robust public opinion. And some things just get stalled, and some things ended up taking so much time to build a development that sort of time is money, and we really need this housing. So I think the regulatory stuff you see is really all over the place, in an adjunct to MLUPA. And I'll tell you, of everything you see there, nothing's more controversial in my area than tall buildings. So we could probably both go on a lot about tall buildings, but that's a very interesting topic as far as, you know, stopping sprawl and looking at efficiencies and that sort of thing. Very, very passionate. But that's my take on why we have so many regulatory new statutes this time around.
Thanks, Senator Fern. So, one of the guideposts for the Montana Housing Coalition has been Shane Phillips's book, Affordable City, where, Shane talks a lot about how, this regulatory reform needs to be coupled with funding for affordable housing projects. And we had the biggest win we've ever had in the 2025 session with House Bill 924, the GO Trust, which created the Housing Trust, led by Representative Lou Jones, the longtime chair of appropriations. Why do you guys think that bill made it across the finish line this session when some of our other funding bills haven't quite got there in the past?
Well, I'll start. This will be a team approach, I'm sure. First of all, we had a working coalition last session on some key issues. And I would say that working coalition was sort of your Representative Nick Dukakis type Republicans and most Democrats. And there was agreement on some goals. Perhaps another one would be like the Medicaid expansion issue. And 924 sort of fit into that. So I think that, you know, if you were to kind of break down legislative philosophies, we've been lucky enough over the past several sessions to have these gigantic ending fund balances. It almost made life miserable. It's just like there's so much money, you know, but we'll take it. And so really, the philosophical angst is, what do you do with that money? Do you return it to the taxpayer? Do you invest it? And what I want to say is there's not really a right answer on that. They're both correct. And we have returned money, a pretty sizable amount of money. But this coalition believed in the concept of this bill, and I really believe like in sovereign funds of a trust. And we have, of course, have the coal trust fund, and that's an investment in our future to take care of some really important, expensive things. So I think as we looked at this, we saw things, if we think 25 and 50 years down the road, which would be beneficial for our kids and grandkids. And I think there were enough of us thinking in that direction that we could get it passed. I think the wild card in all this is, what would the governor do, right? And I think it takes a fair amount of political courage to sign that bill when you realize that the majority didn't want that bill. And I think some really didn't necessarily read the bill, but that's another story. So I think that it was the last dollars coming in on big ending fund balances, and it was a chance to touch a lot of people's lives, because this trust goes in many different directions, different categories, including housing. The time was right, we had the votes, and you know, we kind of got it through on the last few days of the session.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to sound like a fanboy here, but you have to give a lot of credit to Lou Jones. So you talked about the bipartisan coalition. That's true. This was kind of a brainchild mostly of Lou. And Lou has honestly steered our state to be one of the most fiscally solvent states in the nation by almost every metric. You know, he's been in the chair of appropriations for many years. He's been in the legislature for about 20 years now. And when I looked, when I got onto the tax committee, for instance, and started looking at our tax policy, I realized, you know, best practices, what are we not doing? You know, we do most things just about, you know, we're in the top few states of just about everything. And I a lot of times realized a lot of that's because of Lou. And Lou, and some of us were looking around and saying, hey, these states, Wyoming, North Dakota, I believe, have these sovereign trusts. And, you know, from a Republican perspective, it's actually Something that Lou always says is, if you're a smart businessman, the conservative thing to do is not to wait for your roof to start leaking and falling in before you fix it. You realize there's a problem, you need to set some money aside early, address them early. That's a fiscally sound way. That's the conservative thing to do. With some of our Democrat coalition partners, they're willing to invest more, right? Just by nature into needs. So, like Dave said, that coalition came together on a number of things: the homestead exemption, property tax, like you said, Medicaid continuation, stopping a number of bad things. And that's why you're seeing one of the many reasons, well, one of the few reasons actually, and perhaps the main reason you're seeing such an explosive Republican primary cycle and the Civil War is spilling over, is because of that collaboration that happened. It wasn't all Democrats though. We had, it was a weird coalition because you lost some Democrats on one end and you had a big chunk of Republicans you lost, but there was a coalition of legislators who wanted to govern. And the interesting thing about 924 is there was multiple buckets in there, right? And so we were able to negotiate the buckets. The Democrat caucus was very interested, many of us as well, but they were very interested in getting something for childcare. So we were able to negotiate something for childcare, and then we were able to get people on board and buy in with those different buckets that were all things that needed to be done, and consolidate some things that needed to be done. And ultimately, I think it's a pretty big win for us, again, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, like Dave said. So it was a big win. And actually, there was something else I wanted to say, and I lost my train of thought there, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to go back around it. But that coalition was something I'd like to see return, because again, we bucked national trends by being able to solve problems, by being able to govern and get things done. So again, and there will be a move. I think it comes up later in the slides here. And 924. Oh, the governor. That's what it was. I want to talk about the governor. Again, Lou and some others worked very early. And the governor has some things that he wants to, and it's tough as a legislature to negotiate with the executive because we're cats on the curtains, and but there's a few legislators who are very strong leaders, and the governor doesn't always get what he wants, and so there's a give and take that has to happen with the executive too. And I think he got some of his big priorities, and 924 was a priority for some others as well. So that's how that happened. But yeah, there was doubt up until pretty close to the end of the session of whether he would sign it.
The one thing I would add on is that, so for this thing to work, biannual, we're funding it with what's called volatile funds. So, we take, as an example, a volatile fund would be what we collect in capital gains. And I don't have that memorized how much that is. It's quite a bit though. But it only works if our budget's in okay shape and that we're generally collecting enough overall. There's language where, less will go into these trusts if we're having problems. So I think it's really important that we can plan for the future, have accurate revenue predictions, know where we're going. Because now the incentive is, if we do this right, there's a piece of your revenue, a significant piece of your revenue going into the future, like a bank, saving it, putting it away, and making some money on it and investing it in some, I think, super important things. I think on this type of bill, everyone got a piece of what they're interested in. If you're more infrastructure wonk, you have roads and bridges type thing. If you're really concerned, like all of us, about property taxes, we have a big piece on property tax rebate. I think something nobody wants to really confront very much are pensions. And nothing's worse. Well, there are probably some things worse. And you come into the session and say, oh, we got to cut a check for $30 million, because we're out of balance on one of our many pensions. So I think having a robust account for pensions will put us in a really good shape. That will be what's called actuarially sound going into the future. Because it's really easy to lose ground, and the investments have to make so much money, especially in the teacher's retirement system. So I think it puts us in pretty good shape.
Absolutely. Looking ahead to the 2027 session, what are some of the external factors that this group should be aware of as we start to make our plans for our bills in the session?
external factors like what could go wrong, right? You know, I think that the primaries are really important. Uh, And I alluded to the coalition we had. It's not on every issue. But I think that what I'd like to see is a coalition that expands, that we basically have a group of problem solvers. And we have issues that we see eye to eye on. That we want, that we would desire to act like the mature politicians that you think you have in Washington DC that you can have here in Montana. So, I think that's gonna happen. I think we'll have to just see what the results are. So, I would say I'm interested in protecting some of the good legislation we've recently passed. And, make sure that, you know, I mean, there are folks who wanna would like to see 924 probably go away, so. And I'm certainly not opposed to, amending things, and that would be the same thing with our property tax stuff. It's so complicated, and it involves so many different types of property, that obviously, there's opportunities to improve it. But whether we wanna blow it up, some do. I'd rather fix things. And so I think if we have the right numbers, the environment will be good to do that sort of thing. But I suppose there's no guarantees after June 4th, whatever it is.
Yeah, Dave is right. I mean, another external factor will be, of course, there's still time between now and January for, budget changes. So, one thing is, I served 2 sessions and we had big surpluses both sessions. I don't know what it's like to serve in a cutting session, so, we're gonna probably come in a little bit underwater in 9 months, 9 months or so, that could look even worse or significantly worse. So that's a big external factor. But the primaries are huge. But anytime major legislation passes, whether, we pass the homestead exemption this time or 924, the Growth and Opportunity Trust, others, that first session afterwards is always the most precarious for that legislation. So there for sure will be charges at both of those programs to take them out. And then there'll also be a need, just like there always is when you pass major reforms, to fix and clean on them. The homestead exemption does need plenty of work. Again, lessons learned as you do it, especially when you do it in a rush in the session, ways to improve it. And so I guess that also comes down to what do we have going in. Do we have people who want to look at this legislation and from a solution with a solutions mindset, or they want to blow it up, and how many of those are there? And that is probably the most important thing. My gut tells me to be hard, especially with the governor on the back end, and with the numbers that you need to take it out, even if there is movement in either of those programs. But to do the things we need to do to refine and work on those programs, the primaries are key. And you guys have been watching, depending on where you live, they're absolutely brutal for that reason. We have millions and millions of dollars being spent from out of state. We have legislative races that are going to 7 figures being spent on them. I mean, it's like unprecedented. This is unprecedented levels of not only money being spent, but the attacks and the dirtiness of the races. So, and that's the reason. Like, it's big stakes. It's big stakes for who leadership is going to be, and it's big stakes for how much of that coalition survives, and it's also big stakes for the people who the legislators, like our politicians. I am one too. Many don't have, the strongest spine, right? They're not often they're not the most courageous of folk, and so they go with the winds and they see how the winds blow. And if the winds blow strongly against those folks who are willing to work on solutions, those folks who were there still regardless of the fight, or maybe didn't get into it, will quickly fall in line with the folks who are victorious. And so, yeah, the primaries are huge, and I think these primaries set the tone for Montana for the next 10 years.
So as we start to look ahead to the next legislative session, normally there are huge big ticket issues that we know are coming. Like as we headed into last legislative session, we knew we'd have to reauthorize Medicaid expansion. We knew that we had a budget surplus, so there'd be some money to give away. We knew the governor was coming with more income tax cuts. As I look ahead to this session, like I'm struggling to figure out what are gonna be the big ticket issues. Well, I know we'll have budget fights, we know we'll see a tax cut come from the governor. What are some of the other big issues coming, and what do you see happening on housing? And are you gonna continue pushing for mobile home park legislation?
Yes, yes, yes.
That was like five
Well,
questions.
you know, a funny thing happened, I was whining to you about not getting on the education committee. We had a removal of a member on the decennial study for K-12 education. And then I got a call saying, oh, you're on it now, okay? And so, well, I think a big issue is gonna be the report that comes out. And there's kind of focusing on two things, like, we're not doing education maybe at the quality we should be doing it. You know, be competitive, you know, as a first world country, looking at our neighbor states and some of our highly effective countries for education. So I think that's an issue, how to do it better. Sometimes it's related to money, sometimes it's not. But then there's the part of the funding formula and some ideas on, you know, should the state supply the base budget of a school district? Simply said, right now the state spends about 65%. I think there's some talk of, well, could it go to 80%, which is your base budget, and the rest of it's obtained by a local levy. But I think that there'll be probably be some expensive proposals associated, you know, with funding formulas. So I think that will be a discussion. And I'm gonna hand over the mobile home park to George, but I'm angered by some of the things going on with the way people are being treated. And unfortunately, what's happened is this fork in the road has already occurred where it either goes to the tenants, as you did, working in NeighborWorks, if the people want to do that, or it goes very corporate, more kind of your hedge fund direction, very opposite directions, and we're getting farther away from the mom and pop type establishments. So that's a good lead off for George to take it over.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier too, as far as the big things. It was clear the last two sessions, even as a freshman, I kind of knew what to expect both sessions, at least the big things. But the decennial study is huge, and what we do with that and the school funding formula is huge. The governor has an energy task force, and he's been really successful with these task forces, right? They don't. Sometimes with these task forces, everybody talks and nothing really comes out of them. Well, the property tax task force came up with homestead exemption. Both housing task forces came up with a lot of legislation that we've already touched on today. I imagine you'll see the same thing on the energy side. So there's gonna be a lot of energy movement, energy legislation coming through. So that'll be something big. The income tax cuts and how we find efficiencies in our budget to pay for those is gonna be huge. Again, not just the income tax cuts, but there's gonna have to be some efficiencies found. And then, like we discussed previously, the homestead exemption and the Growth and Opportunity Trust and how we tweak and fix and work those. I know there's a lot of folks who want to work on childcare. So, those issues start to get, like you said, not this huge monumental decisions. I think it's gonna be mostly a digestive big things that we did and fixed on them, with mainly those things I touched on. Yeah, mobile home parks. Such a difficult issue in Montana since we have strong Republican, strong anti-regulatory culture politically right now. So there's appetite to help folks, but then when we put the rubber on the road, there's when you start looking at precise solutions, it's really hard to move it. We have some structural issues too, where rules have to pass everything that's landlord tenant through a judiciary committee that looks like a Attila the Hun raiding party, right? Like that's a tough committee. Pretty much every landlord tenant bill goes through it, and man, is that a tough committee. it's a tough one. So, and it's just tough to convince, to get a critical mass of Republicans to, really point out that I think, I've always said that it's such a unique space because it's not like an apartment complex where somebody can, as bad as those are, as the issues, at the end of the day, somebody can get their stuff thrown in the truck and leave. There's a power imbalance and dynamic between a mobile home resident and owner that doesn't exist elsewhere. So there's people who are sympathetic, but it's really hard to find concrete solutions that don't involve serious regulations like we see in some other states like Colorado or that just won't fly given our political environment. I did have a bill that I put together pretty late last time that was for foreclosures and having a fund that will help residents move. I was moving a number of bills. I got super busy. And I will say that one, I didn't have it fully fleshed out by the time it got tabled, but I do intend to bring that next time. I think it's been successful in some other states. So basically, parks closed, having a pre-established fund that will help these folks either relocate, move, or at least get some money for their mobile home. And actually even help the developer sometimes. So I've kind of been slowly working on having something prime time ready on that. Other things that we can do, I'm sure I'll be working with Jonathan on them. Again, it's been very difficult that first session in 23. We did get something to the governor's desk and got it vetoed, and that was a Herculean task to get. I couldn't, like, these two freshman legislators, one Republican, one Democrat, we got it to his desk. The truth is, at the end of the day, though, it was so disheartening because we both knew it didn't really do that much, and that was the thing. So to get that vetoed and say, it really was thin gruel. And then to your question on housing. I think it's tough because we did the low hanging fruit. I think we've taken the middle hanging fruit. So I would love to see a LIHTC, workforce housing tax credit. Tried that 3 sessions in a row and can't get it. Having no money now, I feel like that's. But I'd love a program like that. But I think we've taken that low hanging and mid hanging fruit. So now it'll just be readjusting, and a lot of these housing deregulation issues take time. I did see some data recently that Montana, as far as housing starts, I think housing permit pulls, we've moved up in the nation. So yeah, towards the top, is that right, or first, I guess, or number one. I mean, this stuff takes time, right? It takes time to flow through, and we're probably just seeing the initial effects of that.
Thank you so much. Hey folks, I've just got one more question, so if you have questions, raise your hand. Becky will submit or get you a card, or just raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. So last question, guys. How can this group best engage with legislators? I mean, when you hear from constituents, what makes that advocacy effective? And during the session when it's just full on crazy busy, how do those voices kind of rise above the noise?
That's simple, right? Well, first I had made the suggestion, it may have been to you or the association, that you be working in an interim. And so, there needs to be a menu of legislation that you need. You assign it to folks, it's coming from you. So you're trying to figure out the pulse of things. If you want LIHTC again, then we'll see a LIHTC bill. Make it a better LIHTC bill if that's even possible. And that's just an example. Consult with George or Jonathan about what's going on with mobile home parks. But I think it helps so much when there's organizations who are willing to support, show up at the Capitol, that sort of thing, and then actually, as you do, you lobby for these, and you make some hard discussions with folks who may not, be so much in favor of it. So I think just having sort of the well-oiled machine, and then from our standpoint, if we have this working coalition, that I would hope that housing would be a component of it, and we can have a bipartisan group of legislators advocate for it, and then some of the smarter guys or gals will go to the governor's office or the budget director, and if it involves resources, and say, what do you think about this? That sort of planning would be necessary. So I think keep doing what you're doing, articulate it well, and assign it to some good legislators.
Yeah, I think they've said most of it, honestly. Going through Montana Housing Coalition does a really good job of prioritizing bills and looking at the world of possible and then moving on those, and organizations like that, talking to folks early, engaging with legislators early is great, because like you mentioned, in the session, gosh, I don't know. It's just tough because it's absolute fire hose time, and I do the best I can to talk to folks, but I'm probably not giving them, the kind of attention I would now if I'm talking to them. So engaging early, engaging with those organizations early is best. But during session, I, as far as feedback on particular votes, on our particular issues, yeah, I do reach out, email, phone. I think we still all do that. It just is, it's not particularly neat, and it's not always, at the forefront of our mind because, we're so busy doing a million other things. But yeah, I think Dave mostly got it.
I just quickly wanted to add on that, different communities have different strategies and have different resources to do sort of the capital stack on housing. And so you could take an issue that's sometimes controversial, like tax increment financing, in favor of the tax committee. And you could look at what Missoula does, where they're really driving a lot of housing through their increment and using significant funds to work that. And that may be, and that is something that works well for Missoula. It may not be something they do maybe in buildings. And so, having, I think the success of providing affordable and marketplace housing could differ in places. So the availability of a housing trust that works really well in your community, I think is important. And also how effective you work with the private sector and philanthropy and foundations. Habitat for Humanity is a main player in not just physically building houses, but sort of acting as a de facto developer for starter homes. And I think we housing advocates need to make sure that the work through the Department of Commerce and the Board of Investments, as far as available money for projects, is working well, easy to access, that sort of thing. And if improvements are needed, I suppose we need to know about that.
Questions from you all. I did receive a question on the app. What is up and coming for housing projects tailored to low income or affordable housing in Montana? And I can share, so the housing trust that was part of Lou Jones's Go Trust, House Bill 924, applications for that first $22 million of funding have already been submitted to the Montana Board of Housing, and we expect those awards to come out in June. The Montana Housing Coalition, we will be doing a roadshow, visiting with as many legislators as we can, highlighting those projects and the projects in your communities. So more to come on that. I know the federal low-income housing tax credit funding, the first kind of tranche of that, those applications have been done. Some of the projects have already been cut, and then they'll go to a final round with those funds being released in October. So we'll also highlight those projects as we get out and talk to legislators. So questions from you all? Michael.
On there, very good. Just to follow up on that, we're seeing record, like almost mind-blowing number of units coming. I think we're at about 1.7 billion in the pipeline. and primarily 4% tax credits. And a lot of that is stimulated by all the work that's you guys worked on. So congratulations for all that work. And so we're beginning to address the supply issue. We're gonna, affordability, there's a big difference between 0, 30%, 50% of median, and 80% and 120. And we need to have a housing policy that addresses all those needs, because if we don't, you know, we talked, you know, about teachers' pay. If teachers can't live in the community, we got a big problem. We got a big problem. But that also means that seniors living on very low fixed incomes or someone with a permanent disability has no place to go. So we have to, that has to be part of our policy. I did want to just take a moment to thank Dave in one of his other legislative roles, serving on the Behavioral Health Commission, and it being an experienced houser, that he was able to support funding for the statewide fair market rent reevaluation, which has led to an additional $20 million annually coming in for rental assistance in the state of Montana. So we're able to get that established. That's, you know, that's every year coming in. So that small step, without that critical support from the Behavioral Health Commission, we wouldn't have had it. So thank you.
You're right. I think as your customer base of low AMI goes down, I suppose the subsidy needed to fill the gap is substantial and challenging. To date, I've looked at not trying to pick winners and losers. You know, in Whitefish, supplying affordable housing at the 120% level is important. So is LIHTC or Section 8. But I agree, as we hopefully we articulate that better.
Any more questions, folks? Got one in the back?
Hi, I had a question about tax credits. George, you mentioned workforce housing tax credits and pushback on that. Is the pushback because of the money piece, or is it because of the housing piece? It seems like tax credits, or even like property tax reduction for existing properties that want to keep rents low or want to keep, you know, mom and pop mobile parks in business, could be a good leverage point. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think there was, it was pretty well received, right? The tax rate, no, the workforce housing tax credits, it was well received. There was competing packages, but I had the bill that session, the 23 session, and the governor had his plan. And then there was, I was like, well, you know, for that to pass, we're gonna need the governor's bill to die. Well, the governor's bill died. It got killed in appropriations. And I was like, wow, this is it. This is gonna happen. I was like, it was a Hail Mary in a football stadium with the lights out kind of deal. And then it died, right? And so I'm like, we got it. You know, I'm running down to appropriations and I'm talking to Lou Jones. And I'm like, well, we need a housing bill this session. This is the one. So, and then what happened is this hybrid bill of the governor's bill came back in another bill, and then it included some other things. I think it ended up being a good bill. So I don't know that there was, I think there was some pushback. There's some philosophical pushback on folks who don't within the Republican caucus don't like tax credits, period. I think it's government meddling, and so you have that, and that includes tax credits for property tax, or you know, there's that issue. I think also the workforce housing tax credit has the you know, the association with a lot of multifamily, and there was a really big appetite to do something that focused, you know, more or particularly on single family. So again, I don't think there was anything. Again, usually did really well for Josh Kazmaier in the one session. He got it to the governor's desk and it got vetoed. You know, and it got lots of votes and, you know, throughout the chambers. And got some consideration from the governor. So again, there's some philosophical issues with it, but I think we ended up going with the Homes Act, which I think is a good piece of legislation. Needs some work still, but I think it's a good piece of legislation. I can't remember the answer that the entire question was another part of it.
I had a failed bill. We all can say, I had a failed bill. Right, actually, you don't have failed bills, except for Lou Jones. You know, you're not trying. Right, you're not trying. But I did have a bill that made it through the House, and I think I had to do it on reconsideration because a few yes members of my caucus didn't show up. But it was basically taking the model of what's called tax abatements in businesses. And you actually see a big one being proposed in Great Falls right now. It's taking that model and applying it for sections of deed restrictions. So in other words, if 40% of your units are deed restricted, you'd be working with your local housing authority or something, and it would be a tax abatement, a property tax abatement based on percentages. And, I might try that again. I am sensitive. And then the thing is that when you talk about a property tax abatement, you include all the property taxes because up to 102.5 mills are non-floating mills that basically are state mills. You've heard the 95 mills. Or you just include your local mills, that sort of thing. So, that's, there are different models out there, maybe worthy of a try, but I am sensitive to the fact that we probably won't have that much money to play around with, and it may be just a push to be able to keep up with what our obligations are right now.
We got a question about TIF. So an audience member has been seeing flyers circulating, pushing back against TIF. Can you speak to the status of that and what you think the prospects are for the next session? Will TIF districts survive?
Yeah, well, I've been the subject of many of those flyers, so I guess that's why I grabbed the microphone. So yeah, I mean, there's this group out of DC, they have a chapter here, right? They're based out of DC called Americans for Prosperity. I'm sure you're all aware of. They spent a lot of money on me and on some other folks, and they really hate TIF. And so I've always supported. I've seen. I think for me, it's a local issue in Great Falls. I don't think we use it. I think we use it reasonably. I think each local community should take responsibility for how they use that program and be allowed to through local government and the local voters can choose how they want to administer that program. So I support TIF. There is a lot of and there will be, again, I spoke to you about a certain type of legislator who, after watching the attacks on legislators who did support TIF, will perhaps be a little bit less likely to want to stick their neck out. I know for me, anything that our organization brings out better be absolutely legislatively perfect if I'm back. Because if there's any reason, like to oppose anything they're doing, I'll always support legislation on the merits, but sometimes you give somebody a break, you give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll tell you, that organization will get no benefit of the doubt from me on anything. But no, I will support TIF. And I would guess that the TIFs will survive even under that environment. Maybe even we did some sort of reforms, maybe there'll be some more tweaks. But again, that's something to stay engaged with, right? For local governments and League of cities and towns, and folks and different municipalities, and for the chamber, and for different organizations who understand how beneficial it is for local economic growth to support to get involved with the legislators and get involved in the process, because there are powerful groups that would like to see that end for sure.
Yeah, I agree. One day a year in the tax committee, we have TIF Day. And every pissed off citizen, especially from Missoula, comes to the meeting and rages. And actually, I remember saying, this is not a city commission meeting here, but I do respect their viewpoints. And I think that something like a question we have, and there's not really an answer for it, but like when you look at TIF, how much of it should go that would end up yielding higher taxable value because you're taking an urban redevelopment area. And when the TIF is over, you would hopefully have far more taxable value. And so it's a benefit. So how much do you use on, parks and those kind of amenities versus how much do you use to increase the taxable value? I think it is a blend, and I think it's all right to use it all to increase taxable value in different ways, especially if you're talking about blighted areas. But I think that what we've done is put more oversight to TIFs, more transparency, and I think that's really good. I can assure you, when I knock on doors, and if I talk about TIF, your eyes will glaze over, because most people just don't get it. And I think they should, but, right, thank you for saying that. Many legislators don't get it, but may have an opinion, which is the most difficult situation. So I think TIFs are here to stay, and I think that there will continually be amendments made, I think improvements made, but they're very popular, they're done nationally, and they do a lot of good things for cities and counties.
Thank you so much. We're out of time today, but I want to leave you with a little bit of a call to action. So the Montana Housing Coalition, for the first time this last year, has retained us year-round. So we're going to be doing a lot more work in communities, engaging with legislators in your towns, and we need you to join us as members. We've accomplished a lot in a very short time. We have a permanent source of funding. We have that bill in perpetuity as long as I defend it, and I like to say it's a lot easier to kill bad bills than it is to pass good bills. So when you're killing a bill, you get a lot of chances to kill it. When you're passing a bill, you get a lot of chances for it to be killed. So I think we will be able to build a really strong coalition in the next legislative session and defend the housing trust. But we do need your help. So please join us. We have kind of redone our membership levels. I have Becky, who's got membership forms, and we're going to be willing to cut new members a deal. If you join right now, today, or in the next month or so, we will let you be a member for the rest of this year and then for all of 2027. So please do consider joining the Housing Coalition. We want all your support, and we just want to grow our reach across the state of Montana. And I just want to end thanking these two excellent legislators. We are so lucky in Montana to have bipartisan legislators like these two gentlemen willing to work together to move our state forward and to make it a better place. And I couldn't do my job without them. And so please join me in giving these two housing champions a round of applause.